I guess I'm next. I don't have a PowerPoint to present to you. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything about bioethics, and certainly nothing about biomedical, but I am delighted to be here with you this afternoon. To our moderator, my good friend Jerry, and to the other distinguished members of this panel, and to each of you who have come, I want to thank you for inviting me to share this occasion with you. I realize I'm here because Jerry wanted me to come. And he recommended to you that you invite me, and I'm just happy to come and share it with you. I've met Jerry. He's been to Tuskegee on several occasions. He's seen our history museum there that deals with human and civil rights and with the men in the infamous Tuskegee Syphilis Study. And when Jerry asked me about coming to speak to you, I didn't tell him, but I had some reservations. And the reservation wasn't about Jerry, because I knew he wanted me to come. And I also knew at the end of the day, I was going to say yes, regardless, because of our friendship. But then I really looked at it and say, what could a civil rights lawyer from a rural county like Macon County, Alabama, born in the cradle of the Confederacy, what could he contribute to an organization of experts like you? Because we lawyers usually get you experts when we want an opinion. And if your client has enough money, he can usually find an opinion to substantiate a theory. So I wondered about that. And I knew it wasn't because of Atlanta. I live only 125 miles. You can get on I-65 south and go for 2 hours, and you'll be to Tuskegee, and you won't even have to stop for a red light. And anytime I get ready to go someplace, either I have to get a plane out of Montgomery and fly into Atlanta, and or drive over here and get on a plane. So it wasn't about coming to Atlanta. But my real hesitancy was about what could I say to a group like you. I've spoken to a lot of groups over the last 57 years since I practiced law. But I was just thinking, I've never spoken to an engineering group, not to mention biomedical engineers. So to talk to you today is great, but the thing that struck my attention, though, when Jerry told me that your topic was the National Conference Call on the Affordable Care Act, implications on the African American community, that rung a bell to me. I have spent all of my adult life representing African Americans, basically in the state of Alabama, who have been denied their constitutional rights. It's the only reason I became a lawyer in the first place. When I came back from high school, where I went to learn how to become a preacher, and decided I was going to do what in Alabama African Americans in the 40s and 50s could do, and that was either be a preacher or a teacher. But I found that our people were being discriminated against and that everything was completely segregated. And I made a personal commitment while a junior in college at Alabama State College for Negroes. That was the name, now Alabama State University. I was going to finish college, go to somebody law school, not even apply to the University of Alabama because I knew they weren't going to accept me. Finish law school, come back to Alabama, pass the bar exam, become a lawyer, and destroy everything segregated I could find. I finished Alabama State, finished Western Reserve University Law School in 3 years, stopped by Columbus just in case, and took the Ohio bar. A month later, I took the Alabama bar, and in August and September of 1954 was licensed to practice law in Ohio and Alabama. Never went back to Ohio to practice because my practice was in Alabama. But when I saw that we were going to talk about affordable health care, and if I recall, that act was the first act I believe our president was able to sign. Many presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, tried to get affordable health care for most of our people, and they were unsuccessful. But then when I looked at the matter of the disparity and the effect, the people I have represented, and I've represented people beginning with my representing Mrs. Parks, and even a young lady before her, Claudette Carvin, who did the same thing that Ms. Parks did, but did it 9 months before and didn't have the experience that Mrs. Parks had. From getting transportation systems desegregated to destroying segregation in all of the educational institutions in Alabama, from grade school through the University of Alabama in Auburn and all of those schools. You name it, in our state, I have filed suits for the purpose of bringing about equality for African Americans. So I was not surprised to know that there is disparity in health care among African Americans. I just happened to have picked up and brought along with me a copy of a speech I made a year ago at the City Club of Cleveland Forum. And they had it on regional television up in Cleveland on October the 7th, 2011. And I talked about, if you think in this country that African Americans and other minorities now enjoy all of the rights and privileges of everyone else, then you're mistaken. You need to read the National Urban League report. They put out a report every year, and this happens to be the one in 29 and 10. And it's to the president, and what he said in that report is, and this is the Urban League, not me, it says that in every index, the status of blacks and whites in American society, and they are measured in 5 areas: economics, health, education, social justice, and civic government. In every one of those, there is a disparity in African Americans. So the same thing we have then in health care. I'm happy to know that our president was able to get the bill through, and I know there's been a lot of talk about it, and there's some question about repealing it. But there'll be more people now if the bill is able to continue, and whatever problems are in it, correct them. But we need to have affordable health care, and I'm happy that I was able to represent the men in the infamous Tuskegee Syphilis Study. Now, a lot of you have read about it, and I just want to tell you how I became involved in it. And I became involved in that situation just about like I became involved in almost everything else. And that is on the 27th of July, 1972, a man named Charlie Pollard came into my office. He lived up in Notasulga, about 10 miles north of Tuskegee. I had just got through reading about what had become known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, and he came in and said, "Lawyer, I'm one of the men in that study, and I think my government has taken advantage of me and wanted to know if I would be able to help him." And I told him that I thought I could. That was my introduction to the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. And believe it or not, these years have a way of getting away from you. That was 40 years ago when Mr. Pollard came into my office, and whether you believe it or not, that case is still on the docket in Montgomery, federal court, as Charlie Pollard versus the United States of America. That when I began to investigate it, I found out these men were told that they were going to be treated for whatever was wrong with them. They didn't tell them that they were being involved in a study that was financed by the federal government. They thought that they were being treated for whatever was wrong with them. Well, we ended up representing them, and when we finally found the records, and it was so embarrassing to the government that 2 years later we were able to settle that lawsuit and distribute the little money we was able to get to some 9,000 persons across the nation. And after that, I found that there was a group that had been trying to get President Clinton to make an apology for what the government had done, and they had been unsuccessful. And after I saw Ms. Elva's boys, and Ms. Elva's boys, for those of you who know about the study, was not really an accurate account of what happened, but it served a useful purpose, and it was a purpose of keeping the story alive before the public. And then the lawsuit that we filed kept it alive. And when I found these people were trying to get an apology, they didn't ask the lawyer who represented the men, or didn't ask the men about whether they wanted an apology. They just wanted to get one for them. So these good-natured people did the same thing the federal government had done, completely ignored them. But I decided that we'd take these men, and on the 7th of April, 1997, we had a press conference in Notasulga, Alabama, where Mr. Pollard was inducted into the study. And those men appeared, and I was able to get about 40 national media people to come to listen to their stories. And as a result of what they said, it made the national news that evening. And the president decided he was going to make an apology to those men. And in May of 1997, about some 2 months later, he made that apology, and I accompanied those men. And he stood and he said to the nation and to the men, "What your government did to you was wrong, and I am sorry." No whites were involved in it, only blacks. Again, you had disparity. These people didn't realize what they were getting involved in, but they unwittingly dedicated their lives and exposed their wives and families to a dreaded disease. And even when syphilis became available, when penicillin became available to treat syphilis, they still didn't treat these men. They finally said, "Lawyer, we want you to do one other thing. We appreciate what you've done, but we want a permanent memorial in Tuskegee because our government misused us, but we want the people to know that we made a contribution even though it was unwittingly done." I promised those men, they're all dead now, that if the Lord permits me to live, we're going to do that. And they announced Mr. Herman Shaw, who spoke and introduced the president when the apology was made. They announced the formation of the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center, among other things, was to have a permanent memorial for those men. And for now, about 15 years, what I have done has been travel half around the world to talk to groups like this and others and raise funds so that we now have in Tuskegee a permanent memorial for those men. Not only does it show the contributions they made, and we hope to have it where you will have the greatest collection of material ultimately about that study. And I also, during the course of it, Senator Ted Kennedy invited me to bring 4 of those men up to Washington to testify before his subcommittee on health. And as a result of their testimony, legislation was passed so that what happened to them will not happen again. So these men did make a substantial contribution. And I am delighted that we were able to do it. And we are just happy that we've been able to build in Tuskegee a permanent memorial for those men. And what Mr. Shaw asked the president to do, and he didn't quite understand him, he announced the formation of the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center, and he turned around to the president and said, "We want you to help us form that center." And the president got up and told Mr. Shaw, "We're going to help you form that center." What he was thinking about was a bioethics center that's at Tuskegee University, and they have gotten it, and that's fine. But the men didn't get what they wanted, not through the federal government, but they do have it. I want to kind of close by simply saying to you that the matter of health care is very, very important. The disparity that exists in health care, and I know that's what you are primarily concerned about, and the underlying reason behind it, and most people don't like to admit it, but it is still racism. This country is the greatest nation in the world, and we can do anything we really want to do. And when we don't want to do something, we can find a way not to do it. This country has never really dealt with the question of racism, and the disparities in health care is just one of them. What I tell groups every time I get an opportunity to talk with them is that there are several things we need to seriously think about in this country. And that is, race is still a problem. Now, you may not think it is, but there are some places where it is an overt problem. But if you look at, as you've discussed here, the disparity in health care, that's just one. You pick out any area you want to pick out, and you'll find an underlying reason. It may not be the sole reason. You'll find race is there. So I say to all of you, you are the cream of the crop. You are the most educated people there are. And if we cannot, as a group, be able to decide that racism is wrong and we need to do something about it, that's the first thing. You have to recognize it. Secondly, it's not going to go away by itself. It has been here since the first slaves landed in Jamestown over 200 years ago, over 400 years ago. And once you recognize the fact that it's not going to go away by itself, you're going to need to come up with a plan to do away with it. You're going to need to execute the plan, and then every one of us need to be a part of helping to do away with disparity in every aspect of American life, including healthcare. I want to conclude by telling you, as Jerry has mentioned, there are, for those of you who are interested in civil rights, I've been fortunate enough and did play a major role in really designing and implementing the Montgomery bus boycott that introduced Dr. King, one of the greatest Americans, and been involved in a lot of civil rights activity. If you're interested in civil rights activity, we do have some copies of Bus Ride to Justice. It's an unusual copy, but we do have a few copies of them, and we usually sell them for $25. And I do have a few copies of Tuskegee Syphilis Study, if you're interested in that, and it sells for $20. But what's more important to you, and I want to make a challenge to you. I want to make a challenge, and I want to do an invitation, and then I'm through. The challenge is this. we want to be sure that what happened in the Tuskegee Syphilis Study never happens again. And as a part of that challenge, you want to also be able to continue to work toward doing away with disparities, not only in healthcare, but in every aspect of American life where we find it exists. And then the invitation is, come 125 miles to Tuskegee and see the Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center. That center does three things. One, it gives you and lets you know the contributions made by the three ethnic groups that have occupied the land: Native Americans, Americans of European descent, and Americans of African descent, all under one roof. And as you know, Native Americans, it was their land. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to be down at Atmo. The Native Americans are dedicating a museum, and they invited me down, and I'm going to go down. They didn't invite me to speak, but I'm going to go there and be there anyway, because that's a part of what we are at that museum. Then the second mission of it is to serve as a memorial for the men in the infamous Tuskegee Syphilis Study. And if you are interested in that, I do have some information here, some additional information that I can give you on that. And then the third part, many people don't realize it. And they think about, when they think about civil rights, they think about Montgomery. And of course, I know about that, and I was involved in the planning and execution of that. They talk about the Selma to Montgomery March. I got the court order after they beat them back on Bloody Sunday so they could march from Selma to Montgomery. So I've been involved in all of the civil rights litigation coming out of central Alabama since the mid-1950s. But many cases arose in Macon County, Alabama. So a third mission of this small history museum is to show the various lawsuits that originated in that county and the role it played, even going all the way back to Booker T. Washington, who founded Tuskegee University, which was then Tuskegee Institute. So it's been good being here with you today. I hope you'll accept the challenge, and I hope you will continue to work toward doing away with disparities in health care. Thank you very much.